Welcome to the Spa Girls podcast, the self-publishing podcast for authors. You're in the right place for the best writing, marketing, and publishing advice, plus interviews with industry experts and best-selling authors. I'm Cheryl Phipps.
I'm Wendy Vella.
And I'm Trudy J. And this week we are here with Becca Puglisi. Say hello, Becca.
Hi, hello.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Hello. Now, Becca is one of the authors of the amazing Emotional Thesaurus. Is it thesauruses or thesaurusi?
I
I feel like
don't
there's,
know. Thesaurus just feels really pretentious to me because who actually uses that word? We just say thesauruses. It's the emotion thesaurus. There's a bunch of thesauruses.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
excellent. And I've got almost, well, and now I've discovered I have to purchase a new one because a new book on fear is coming out, which I'm super excited about. But you probably can't see them in my thing now, but they're in there in my bookshelf
Oh
shelf
yeah,
behind
I
me.
see them. Little
All
rainbow.
I think I've got 10 of them or something. Sounds about right.
Nice.
Anyway, sorry, Becca, I'm going to read your bio and introduce you to our listeners, and then we're going to get right into the questions on emotions and in particular fear, which I'm super excited about. So, Becca Puglisi is an international speaker, writing coach, and best-selling author of the Emotion Thesaurus and other resources for writers. Her books have sold over 1.4 million copies and are available in multiple languages, are sourced by US universities, and are used by novelists, screenwriters, editors, and psychologists around the world. She is passionate about learning and sharing her knowledge, with others through her Writers Helping Writers blog and via One Stop for Writers, a powerhouse online resource for authors that's home to the character builder and the storyteller's roadmap tools, which is all very exciting.
Very cool.
Yeah. So a lot of awesome things for people to be using when they're writing. So that's fantastic, Becca. I appreciate you for all the things that you're putting out there.
Oh,
It's fantastic.
well,
Um,
thank you. Our name says it all. We've learned a lot and we've grown a lot, and only through uh, the goodwill of others, really, in the community that the writing community is. And so, we try to put out things that are going to help. And that's what we want to do is just help writers become better writers. So
Yeah,
yeah, that's
that's
awesome.
awesome.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, how did you get into publishing the Emotion Thesauruses? Um,
Sorry, sigh.
You're trying too hard.
It's going to go all the way through the interview
I
there.
know, I'm not going to say that word at all, ever. Yeah.
Yeah, I started writing fiction in 2004. And I actually write these books with a writing partner, with Angela Ackerman. She lives in Canada. And we met at Critique Circle, which is an online critique group where you go and you can read other people's work and find the work that you like, and you become, connected that way. And so that's how we kind of started our collaboration. And we started a blog together and made the rookie mistake of for our fiction writing all about writing, which, they all say don't do that because, you want to market to your readers. And we were,
Yeah.
each writing for fiction at that time, but it worked out great because that was what we were excited about, so we started blogging about that, and we thought, let's do these lists of emotions that we've been keeping. We had found in our fiction writing when we were critiquing that our characters were always doing the same things over and over. If they were sad, they were always doing certain things. If they were angry, they were clenching their fists. If they were confused, they were shrugging. They were always doing the same thing, and we couldn't think of any other way to express those emotions. And so we started keeping these lists of what people do when they're angry or sad or confused. And that was just kind of between the two of us as we were critiquing our own work. And we decided that we were at the blog, we were going to put up one emotion a week, and we were going to flesh it out and make it this big, long, list of ideas for other people who might be having that same problem. And lo and behold, it was kind of a universal problem. Everybody who read it was like, oh my gosh, I have this problem, but my characters are always doing X, Y, and Z. So it was a problem that was really common among writers, and there wasn't really anything that was addressing it. And so that was how the Emotion Thesaurus got started. And we had kind of a big response to it. People were very excited about it and started saying, "Oh my gosh, if you could put this in a book, then I could have it all together." And that's when we were like, okay, well, let's write a book. And that's what we did.
It's
It
history.
did fairly well. So we decided to write more books about, the things that we were struggling with that we thought other people might find helpful too. And that was how it all got started.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
It's a
That's so
brilliant
good.
idea.
Yeah,
Yeah,
brilliant idea.
yeah, I
Do
love
you
it.
still write fiction too?
Not right now. I just have so
Too
little
much.
time,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's hard to kind of juggle it all. And this is doing very well, and it's very rewarding to be able to write and use the skills that I have. I was a teacher before I was a writer, so it's kind of like
yep,
dovetailed really nicely.
yep,
And being able to help people and do something that feels really good.
yep.
So for now, this is what I'm focused on. Eventually,
Mm,
I'll try to get back there.
That's awesome.
nice.
I'd love to
We
be
are
in a
grateful.
workshop where you were there
Mm,
teaching about all this kind of stuff. I'm like, come to New Zealand, do
yeah.
this.
Yes. Ooh, yes.
So,
Yes, I would be happy. Happy
yeah,
to do that.
okay. Well, we'll just have to organize a conference for
We'll
you.
put your name forward for the next
Mm.
conference.
You
Perfect.
just, well, you didn't just say we're going to organize the conference, did you,
I didn't
Julie?
say I was going to organize it, no.
Trudy did that.
Um,
Shh.
okay, Becca, one of the most common mistakes you see when writers trying to put emotion in their books? Like, what's one of the things that you hear yourself saying over and over again to people?
It probably would be some form of inauthentic emotion. Either there's too much emotion, we make the mistake of feeling like, we know it's important to get the character's emotion across because that's how the reader connects with and starts to empathize with the character when they can kind of connect with their emotions or the situation that they're in. And so it's really important to accurately convey the character's emotion. And so it's a little bit hard sometimes to do that. And so people will over convey, they will get really obvious and you end up with melodrama and you end up with responses that don't really make sense and consistent responses that kind of tire the reader out. Like, okay, all of this high emotion, it's too much. So that's a very common mistake that I think a lot of people make. The other one is the mistake that Angela and I were trying to correct is that just not knowing how to express it. It's basically told most of the time. We're afraid of our own ability to convey the emotion accurately, and so we come right out and say it. He was angry or she was frustrated, and that's just another form of telling, and it does get the emotion across, but it doesn't pull the reader in, and so it kind of robs them of that opportunity to build that bond. So very, very important to show emotion. You can do that through the character's thoughts because our thoughts are very honest. We're not tempering or censoring our thoughts. You can show that through body language and what's happening. You're the character's saying words, but their actions kind of show how they feel about what's being said. And through even internal responses, those knee-jerk visceral reactions that happen when someone is frightened or when they are struck with grief. You have these biological things that happen in the body that you can't really control. And so when you can show those things happening, it's a really good way to show the emotion to readers and make it really clear to them without ever having to say what it is.
Mhm.
That's probably the biggest one is just getting people to understand how important it is to show and not tell when it comes to emotion.
Yeah, yeah. I remember hearing that advice though, and when I was a younger writer, and I thought it meant I had to take all of the thoughts and everything out, and I was trying to show emotion by clenching fists and tightening of lips and things like that. And there's a balance, right? Like you kind of need to do sort of all the
Sure.
different things that you were explaining about, rather than just relying on, say, body language, which is kind of what I did for a
Absolutely.
period there. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
The
yeah.
vehicles that you can use, and if obviously it's true for so many areas of storytelling, but when you vary your methods, it's much more effective. So
Mm,
mixing all those together is the best way.
yeah. And
I think we
another
tend to
thing,
overwrite as well, like when we're a bit, don't we? Overwriting's huge, like when we want to explain something, instead of a good body emotion or a good thought, we tend to just throw words at the page. I know I'm guilty of that sometimes, and it's just like you've actually
For
just got to
sure.
work out, what you're feeling.
Yeah, when Angela and I were critique partners, we would write back in the day when we were writing on each other's manuscripts. We would put RUE in the margin for resist the urge to explain, which is
Yeah.
I think we got that from self-editing for fiction writers. But that was because again, we're doing the same things that I think everybody struggles with in the beginning, particularly is that we would show wonderfully what was going on, but then we would tack on like a little bit of telling just to make sure we were totally clear, everybody got it, and
Yeah. Yeah.
resist the urge to explain. That's very
Yeah,
common.
yeah, definitely.
Mm.
And then yeah, it's so many things.
So
So
many things.
with emotion and like I feel like there's two different things that you're trying to accomplish. There's the emotion of the reader as they read what you're reading and what you've written, and then the emotions of the characters. And sometimes it's the same, but sometimes it's like as the reader you kind of can see something coming and you're like tensing up, but the
Mm.
character themselves doesn't see it coming, for example, or and maybe there's an emotion that the character is feeling that maybe the reader isn't necessarily going to feel in that same way. Do you feel that's something we should be thinking about, or how do you deal with that sort of distance and with emotions? Does that make sense? Do you get what I'm?
Yeah, for sure. I think that the character emotion is it's just intrinsically tied to the reader emotion if we write it well.
Yeah.
We can write a great story, but if we don't get the emotion right on the page, the reader's not going to connect to the
Mm.
character and they're not going to get into the story. So I think it's just all about finding that balance of how to show the emotion, how to get it across, so that the reader picks up on it. And they may not be feeling, if the character's sad, the reader may not feel sad, but they're going to get a twinge of that. It's almost like a reflection of it, just a little hint of it. And a lot of it is just it's a shared response, that they have been sad before. Maybe they have experienced something like the situation that the character was in, and it creates this like emotional memory for them. And so that again, it creates a connection between the reader and the character. And I don't, when I'm writing the character emotion, I'm not actively thinking about the reader and what I want the reader to feel because I know that if I get the emotion right for the character, then that's going to come.
Mm.
So that's kind of why we focus a lot on showing and not telling the emotion and creating, the right circumstances where the emotions can naturally evolve. I mean, that's part of it too with story planning is you want your character to get to a certain place and you want them to experience certain things and certain emotions are going to come up because of that and you orchestrate the story to get them where you want them to go.
Mm.
And, if you're writing the emotion well, then the reader comes along for the ride.
So
Yeah.
setting plays a big part in that too, I guess. Yeah.
What's that?
Setting. Would
Setting.
setting,
Yeah.
yeah. So like a dark night, you're walking along, that sort of thing. So that would
Mhm.
also be another contributing factor to the fear, building the fear, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of actual opportunity in the setting. If you because you have a lot of choices. The overall setting sometimes is kind of determined by the story that you're telling, but you have a lot of opportunities for different settings in your story. And if you can choose ones that are emotionally charged for the character, that have some kind of connection, either good or bad, then it automatically amplifies the emotion that the character is going to be feeling and kind of primes them for having bigger responses, more emotional responses. And so it's very smart to think strategically about the setting and the settings that you choose, and even seeding things in the setting for the character to interact with. If there's something there that triggers a memory or that triggers a fear. I mean, there's lots of ways that you can set up your setting to create that emotional environment that's going to give you what you want for the character in the story. It's a good
Yeah.
point.
So if you know that a
Mm.
character is scared of clowns, you know that they have to end up somewhere at an emotional point at the fun fair or something, like where they're going to interact with scary
Yeah,
clowns. I don't know. But
Mm.
there's that kind of setup that you have to build into it so that when that moment comes where you want them to experience this particular emotion, it's all been there in yeah, that's really
right.
good. So let's talk about fear in particular. What was it about fear that made you decide to do an entire thesaurus on it? Like what was it? Why?
Yeah, we were really
Why?
looking at kind of where the gaps are and what we have written about. I mean, this is our 11th book, and we have touched on a lot of different things. And the one thread that I think is super, super important to every really good story is character arc. If you're writing a story with a change arc, obviously where the character's going to undergo this evolution. And so we've touched on different pieces of it. We wrote a book about emotional wounds, and we have one on character traits. And we've written other thesauruses that haven't been published on motivation. And we've got the conflict thesaurus. And one of the things that we realized was that we hadn't written anything about fear as it plays into character arc. So the fear thesaurus is there is a lot of information in there about how to write fear well. But there's a big chunk of it that's dedicated to the role that fear plays in storytelling as a character arc element, that it contributes to the character's arc, which contributes to the arc of the story. It's really kind of foundational, actually. So we have like fear that, that you're feeling, but then we have the greatest fear that the character is struggling with. So it's kind of two different kinds of fear that we touch on in different ways in the book.
Yeah. So we're not actually talking about necessarily like fear, like in a horror movie where you're like jump scare kind of fear. You're talking about like those kind of the fears that come up at like the kind of emotional fears from a wound or something like that we've had from the not a physical wound, an emotional wound from our past.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's really both. I mean, we talk about where a great fear comes from, and then how it kind of train wrecks the character's life and derails them and starts to motivate them and push them in wrong directions, and it digs them into a deeper hole that they have to get themselves out of, but they're afraid to face their fear, and so they continue on in dysfunction until eventually they're able to face it and, overcome it, or at least learn to manage it. And so
Yeah.
there's that whole piece of fear, that whole part of fear that plays into the character arc. But fear itself, whether it's a big, huge fear or just the emotion of fear, is um, it's a common thread that we all experience as people. It's a universal
Yep.
factor. And so using it in our stories and being aware of what the characters' fears are and how they respond to fear, all of that, when we are aware of that and we can write it into the story, we end up with a character that's really authentic and that reads well to readers and that they can connect with, because they understand being afraid. They understand having this thing that they know they're afraid of, and they don't want to admit it, and they see that they're in big trouble if they don't face it, because they have been in that situation themselves. So it's really about tapping into the universality of fear, whether that's fear as an emotion or fear as a thing that they have to overcome. Understanding all of that, I think, is really key, because you can have a great story premise, one that's really compelling and provocative, and you can write the story, structure it out, and plan it really well. But if you don't have a character that's believable and that's relatable, people aren't going to connect to the story. So the character, in my opinion, is like the biggest piece of pulling in readers and creating a really memorable and long-lasting story, and getting the character arc right is huge, and fear is a big piece of that.
Yeah. So that's that part of it is, so how do we do that successfully? How do we start with this character and create something that they would, because we're not talking like, for me, I'm terrified of sharks. Like, that's not the fear that we're talking about. We're talking about like the kind of linking into those emotional wounds, which is one of your other
Right.
books. And kind of having that fear of kind of putting themselves out there, or it's a very particular kind of fear. So how do we?
Yeah, these are the fears that are really detrimental. I mean, you could be afraid of heights or afraid of clowns, and those things are real, but that's not going to derail the character's life, really.
No.
I mean,
Yeah.
they're gonna make certain choices, and then they're not going to have to deal with those things, and that's totally fine.
Yeah.
But when someone has a fear of rejection, or a fear of failure, or a fear of change, or a fear of conditional love, I mean, there's like so many that are real that become these big roadblocks in the person's life, because they're, even if it's on a subconscious level, they don't want this thing that happened to them before, whatever emotional wound it was. Most of the time, this emotional wound, it creates a fear that it's going to happen again. And so if they were rejected, they develop a fear of rejection. If they were take your pick, if they failed at something, then they're going to have a fear of failure. If they let somebody down, they're gonna be afraid of that, and so that becomes this big driving thing for them to make sure that never happens again. If it happened once, it could happen again. I have to keep it from happening again, and so they create these this, we call it emotional shielding, that they put on unintentionally to keep that from happening again. So it's dysfunctional habits, it's bad behaviors, negative traits, flaws, all these things. They think they're going to protect themselves with those things because that's going to keep that thing from happening again. But it creates all these other problems that create even more problems that they eventually will have to address. So, and that's where, that's where the character ends up at the start of the story. All of that stuff is in the backstory. And you've got the character at the start with this massive fear, whether they acknowledge it or not, that's impacting their life and keeping them unhappy. And then they spend the rest of the story figuring out, what that is and, addressing it. When it comes to us figuring that out for our characters, it really is, it really interesting because it's a puzzle piece. It's stepping stones. You've got the wound, which leads to a fear that the character develops, and a lie that they believe, either about themselves or about the world. Why did this happen? There has to be a reason why this happened, because if there's no reason, then it's completely random and it could happen again, and I can't deal with that. So why did it happen? It's because I'm defective, or it's because those people can't be trusted, or because all people are like this. And so from that, you get the emotional shielding, which leads into the fatal flaws, the things that the person is going to have to deal with before the end of the story. So you can really start anywhere to figure out what the fear is. If you know what the wound is, you can be thinking, all right, I know this happened to my character. What fears would naturally come out of that? And then you can move forward from there. Or if you know that you don't know anything about the character's backstory, you're writing a story about blank. It's a story about finding true love. Well, if that's my character's motivation, what big fear might really stand in the way of them actually being able to find true love? And so you can kind of work backward and, figure out, okay, well, maybe it's this. Oh, well, what wounds then could have caused that to happen? So you can start at the beginning or you can start at the end, and you can just move back and forth and kind of figure out all the pieces so that you end up with a character arc that makes sense, because everything flows into the other. So there's so many ways that you can really figure out your character's fear. It's really pretty cool.
And the sources are a great way to do that, actually. I've done that. I've sat there and said, okay, I want my character to feel this way, and then looked up the thesaurus and said, okay, so these are the reasons why someone might feel this way. So that's actually, it ties in really well. I've used it for exactly that reason, to try and figure out. So yay, this is thesaurus.
Awesome.
So one thing I wanted to talk to about is based on actually what you've just been saying. I read a book recently that had everything right, like that she had the right characters, she had the wounds, she had everything was all perfect, and it was all there, and I did not connect to the characters or the emotion in it. And I when I thought about it and tried to figure out why, what I came down to was that the characters they knew too much about themselves. Like, they knew what their wound was, they knew why they had the wound, and they told you right up front, instead of it being a discovery process for us as the reader. So could you talk about that, like the ways to maybe successfully put across that emotion without kind of selling it or telling too much, I guess? I don't know. Is that
Yeah, I think that's a huge problem. And it all goes back to that question of authenticity, because as people, we're not self-aware. I mean, we all are to varying degrees, but we're not normally very aware of the bad things or the things that we don't want to think about. And so, not many of us are going to admit yeah, I'm afraid of this thing and it's completely ruining my life. But I'm not going to do anything about it. So when you have that in a story, you're right. It's not good for developing reader empathy, because it's not really believable. They can't really connect with that person because they're not really authentic.
Yeah.
So I think it's all about laying the breadcrumbs, and not giving away anything too soon. And whether that means, some stories start out where the reader knows right away what the wounding event is. It's very obvious what the wounding event is, even maybe to the reader. But they're not aware of how it's impacting them. And so that fear then becomes one of the things that they have to unravel. And as long as we don't give everything away right up front, and we, again, kind of lay those clues down along the way, I think that story mapping is super helpful for that, because then we can lay it out and see, these are all the things that I want to get across about my character, and the things that my character needs to learn about themselves. And so you can actually map it out and see, all right, this one is going to come out here. This one is going to come out here. And that way it's not all kind of plopped into the beginning or all at the end.
Yeah.
And that's a different problem where the reader starts to feel like they're being strung along, like, come on, like give me something already. So you can map it out so that you are sharing the important things that readers need to know about the character gradually across the story. And I think that that can really help with that.
Mm,
Yeah,
mm,
that's a great answer. Yeah.
yeah.
Because it was just funny. Like I was like, man, she's got everything here. Everything's right.
We've
But I
all read
just,
those books, eh? And
yeah,
it's just like it's
yeah,
got the whole, it's all there, but no emotion almost.
yeah. And it
You
was,
can't, you want flaws, don't you, in your characters? That's why you read them,
Yes.
and you want to read their redemption arc, and that's where it comes in, isn't it? All the
yeah.
feelings and
But when you think about it, we're all not sitting here going, we're not so self-aware that we go, I know that this thing is my problem and this is goes back to this one particular moment and
mm,
I know it all of that, but I'm just going to let it happen. Like we're not that self-aware. So why would we be that
Right.
self-aware in a book?
mm,
Yeah. So is there like, if we're talking specifically around fear, because when I was asking these questions, I was thinking about fear as in scary moments in the book, like fear as in
Yeah.
like that kind of stuff. And I was like, well, is there a right amount of fear to use? Is there ever a time when you shouldn't use fear? So could we maybe block it off and talk about it in that way? Because I kind of get that fear that we're talking about with the emotions, you kind of need that through the whole book, right? Like that's
Yeah.
and kind of in every book, someone's going to have a fear or yeah. But if we're
mm,
talking about like
And
a
there's
scary fear, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, there's varying fear runs on a spectrum, So you have fear and then you have terror, you have the really big, but you also have uncertainty. It's like a very, very, very low level fear. It's not quite fear yet, but it's where it starts. It's on the way. Confusion sometimes, can be the beginning of fear. It's all of the little things along the way. So having fear in its various levels throughout the story is a good idea. We have actually a chapter in our book that Angela came up with this metaphor. It's awesome about an elevator and how there are different intensity levels of fear that you can choose for your story at the right time. We have really mild fears, just fleeting things, the kind of like the jump scares that come and you get an adrenaline spike and then it goes away. And those are good at certain points in your story, just, for different reasons. And then you have the ones that are a little more sticky, they are something that you have like a little bit of a personal relationship with that kind of is recurring. And it's not very intense, but it's always in the back of your mind and you can feel it creeping up on you. And then you have fears that have been managed. It's something that you're aware of and you have dealt with it, but it's always there. It's still kind of driving some of your decisions and pushing you towards or away certain things. And then you get into the really deep, the deeply disturbing fears, which are the fears that come out of emotional wounds, and those are the ones that take a lifetime sometimes to figure out and overcome. And so those kinds of deep wounds that are at the character arc level, those are going to pop up. They should pop up frequently throughout the story because your character has to learn to recognize what it is and then deal with it. And they're not going to get it right every time because that's not how we are in real life. And so you have to give them multiple opportunities to deal with their fear. And I like to tie them in at kind of the big turning points in the story, so that it's always coming back to, whatever's happening. It's a different situation, but same fear that they're having to deal with. Sometimes they get it right, sometimes they don't. But having the different levels of fear at different points, it's important to vary the emotions that the character is feeling altogether. So when you can't have fear, fear, fear all the time. You have to have, you have to have some up, you have to have some down, you have to have some light, with your different emotions. And it's the same thing, with fear. You can use different levels of it at different points in the story, to get whatever it is that you're trying to achieve at that point in the story for your
And
character.
having the character react to it in a different way each time,
Yeah.
or progressively, you know, putting it back to something that had happened before in a way that they're not actually solving it right then and there, but becoming aware. that there is in the
Right.
show.
And also responding differently because of their growth. You know, fear off also gives you an opportunity to show the evolution as the character
Yeah.
is going along. Because when the same
Mhm.
fear comes up, as they become more aware of it, they start to deal with it. And then their responses are going to be a little bit different as they go on. As in the beginning, it's complete denial and
Mm.
just avoidance, you know, but now they're recognizing and they're not comfortable with it and they may still mess up, but as they go along, their response is going to be different. So tying it in, the big fear, tying that in throughout the story is good. But also, you know, throwing in things that are going to have some of those lower level fears and give you a variety of emotions throughout the story. I can't remember where I read this, but I somebody had this idea for when you're planning your story of putting each scene in an index card. And there should be and they tracked the emotion of the main character in that scene in every scene throughout the story, and they marked it with the emotion they were feeling at the beginning and the emotion they were feeling at the end, so that you can make sure that there is an emotional progression, a shift in every story. Because if you're going through the scene and there's no emotional change, the scene's going to be flat. Readers are going to pick
Mm.
up on that. So making sure that each scene has an emotional shift, whether it's from up to down or down to up or down to up to down again, that keeps the story moving and the momentum going. And fear in its various forms is one of the ways to make that happen.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
I have also read that, and I cannot remember where I read it, but I know what you're talking about. Then maybe the story grid, I feel like maybe, but I don't know. I'm not 100% certain.
I don't remember. It's been a
Yeah.
while.
So that's what's really interesting is the idea of using that fear, and it's the psychological fear that we're talking about here, the emotional one, say of fear of rejection, which maybe is something that happened in childhood, using that to create the character arc and the plot. So if we did that, like if you could kind of talk about how if you know that your character has this fear of rejection from being rejected when they were a child by their parents, say how would that play out and how would you use that to create the character's arc? Like obviously they have to maybe change from having being fear of rejection to putting themselves out there and maybe being rejected and being okay with that, but hopefully not being rejected. I don't know. And then how do you use that to plot your book? Like how do you use that kind of underlying fear to create plot points? Yeah.
Yeah. So I started looking at a bunch of movies because movies for me are easier to analyze. I don't know why it is. I think they're just more obvious
Yeah.
what's happening.
Yeah.
Um, And so I found a really good example in Rocky that we used in the book. And every Rocky is afraid of never having respect, never finding having respect for himself or getting the respect of others. He's, you know, been a bum his whole life. Nobody takes him seriously as a boxer. He's kind of failing at everything at the beginning of the story. And every turning point something happens that challenges that fear, that he gets an opportunity, that he can make a choice, and the choice has to do with him trying to get respect. And it leads to something good, and sometimes it leads to, you know, something that isn't quite so good. But those turning points, by creating choices, creating opportunities that create choices for the character, they're always going to the fear plays into that, but a part of it that is it's a lot to explain. So I'll try to be brief. There's the character arc. One of the big pieces that's missing for the character that is motivating them is their missing human need. There's you know, Maslow was a psychiatrist back in the day, and he came up with this theory that there are five basic human needs that all people have, and if those needs are not met, they become motivators for them. So it's things like survival, you know, sleep, food, all of that. There's love and belonging is a human need that we have, safety and security, esteem and recognition, and then self-actualization, you know, just being able to be who you are and live your truth and do the things that you're passionate about. All of these things are vital. And if one of them is missing, then they start driving you subconsciously towards filling that void. And so when you're looking at the character's arc, one of the things that happens when they experience an emotional wound and a fear that comes out of it is it creates a void in one of those missing human needs. Normally because of what they are doing to try to keep that from happening again.
Mm.
So when that that human need is really important to know as well. It's just one of the puzzle pieces. And they will be working the whole story towards subconsciously filling that void through the outer motivation, the story goal. They choose a story goal that is going to give them what they think they're missing inside. So for Rocky, he decides he's gonna go up against the champ, because he has no respect. And so that's an opportunity for him, if he could possibly win, then he is going to fill that void and he'll have respect for himself, but also from other people. And so every option that happens at the turning points, it's an opportunity for him to meet that need. And so it drives their decisions. And so that's the way that I would like to tie fear into a story, is through those turning points. And they don't always have to be the exact same, the greatest fear that comes up. Sometimes it's just an opportunity where they have a choice to move forward into what's better and what's healthy and change, which is uncomfortable, or fall back into what they have always done in the status quo, even if that's not working for them because it's comfortable.
Yeah.
But just having those turning points, choices that they get to make. And if you can tie their fear into it, I think it's a bonus because it becomes very consistent and it reads across the whole story. Even again, so much of like what we do when we're reading is not on a conscious verbal level. But it creates this synchronicity across the story that can be really satisfying, I think, for readers.
Because it has to be plausible, right? You can't just be throwing in fears left, right, and
Yeah.
center, that
No,
aren't,
exactly.
going to build the character.
Yes, for sure.
And then something like that fear, that's the emotional fear that they've had carrying through, well, that has to be the dark moment where they kind of like fall back into old habits and a challenge or something comes up and then they fall back before, gathering themselves together again and moving forward
Rising
again.
up.
So rising
That
up.
bravery, isn't it? Stepping away and acknowledging and all of that sort of pivotal moment,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you can get that right, that's the moment where we all love that, where they kind of step up after kind of falling back into their old ways and making it happen after all. Yeah, that's the
And
moment.
with Rocky, it's very cool because in that moment he realizes his dark moment of the soul is when he realizes he cannot win. Like he cannot beat this guy. He's the heavyweight champion of the world. He can't beat him. And now he's gonna be defeated like internationally. Like everybody's gonna see it. It's like the worst possible way to not get respect from people. So he realizes, what if I can just go all 15 rounds? If I could go, nobody's ever done that with him before. If I can last all 15 rounds, then they'll prove that I'm able to do something that nobody has ever done before.
Yeah.
And in the end, that's what I love about Rocky is that it seems like he has failed because he did not win the fight. But he didn't win. I mean, he didn't lose. He won respect. Everybody now looks at him and says, yeah, sure, he didn't win, but look what he did. Like, he's a totally great boxer. And now he has respect and he has a boxing career that he has, never been able to achieve at. And it's a great example.
Yeah. And I love that he didn't win the fight because that was kind of had to learn that respect wasn't just about this one thing. It was
Right.
actually about proving himself in another way, which is actually a
Yeah.
really good lesson. Good lesson for us all to learn. So there's
Yeah.
another thing. Are we learning a lesson or some kind of without it being bashed over the head? I like that.
No lecturing,
No
just
lecturing,
learning.
Yeah.
please. So why is fear such a powerful tool? Like, why is it so useful to us?
I think for one, because it's universal. It's
Mm.
something that even if the character is afraid of something the reader is not, they understand how fear ties us up and hamstrings us and ends up pushing us to places that we didn't want to go in the first place.
Yeah.
And anytime we can use something universal in the story, we gather way more readers to our story and our character than we would with something that's very niche. So universal is really good. But I also think it's important because it's something that has to be overcome. And I think that's what so many really good stories are about. It's about surviving. It's about getting better. It's
Mm.
about learning and growing. And fear is a very natural thing as part of the human experience to have to overcome.
Mm,
And, when we can see a character who's going through that process that we have gone through with different fears or with different difficulties in our lives, um, it's very compelling and it makes them somebody that we want to root for. We want them to win because we want to win ourselves in that same way.
mm,
So it's
Yeah.
the whole universality of it, I think.
It's
yeah,
so relatable. It's
Mm.
for
yeah.
everybody. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you think about it, fear is kind of like this. It can be quite irrational, i.e.,
Yeah.
my fear of sharks, but
Yeah.
it's a protective mechanism, right? Like it's there to protect us, and
Right.
our subconscious, I guess, is where you would say it would come from, doesn't necessarily know the difference between a real fear, i.e.,
Yeah.
possibility of sharks, versus a non-fear, like just a fear of being rejected or something. I mean, or a fear of the pain that might come to you from being rejected, right? Like it's a fear of that kind of
Mm.
stuff. So, yeah, I don't know.
Ultimately, we protect ourselves, don't we?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
From
and we
those
all do
fears.
it, right?
That's a mechanism, isn't it?
Mm,
From a
Yeah.
young age, you don't, you protect yourself from fear,
mm,
Right.
you
And that's why it's so important, I think, to understand the psychology behind it, because
Yeah.
that's what drives us all and kind
Yep.
of what the struggle that we're all in this world. So if we can
Mm.
understand how it works for us and then we can apply it to our characters, it
Mm.
just makes them really feel really real.
mm.
Mm.
Yeah, it is true.
There's
It's
so
kind of
many.
weird when you think of adrenaline junkies, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Who perhaps don't have that fear that the rest of the world does because it's something that they're constantly seeking. I just wonder how that plays out for them.
I'm sure they've got
Yeah.
other fears though, right?
Yeah.
Oh, true.
Different fears.
Yeah.
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 Yeah,
Maybe they're doing the adrenaline junkie stuff to get over some other fear of, that they
Mm.
don't want to have to
maybe.
think about. So they go and push
Yeah.
themselves physically to avoid the internal.
Success,
Who
failure,
knows?
it just goes on,
Here's a
doesn't it?
story.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is why it's
Yeah.
fascinating, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
um, fear feels like it drives the conflict, right? Like, is that right? Like, would you say that internal fear drives the conflict in a novel, or not necessarily?
I would say that it drives the plot
Mm.
because if you're fashioning your
Mhm.
story around your character's arc and the steps forward and the steps back that they make along the way, then the fear is absolutely going to impact the plot.
Mm.
And that's why I think it's super important if you're writing a change arc to figure out what that fear is so that you know how to tie it in at those key moments.
Mm.
So, yeah, it definitely doesn't influence the plot.
Yeah. I remember
Mm.
years ago hearing, and I can't even remember who it was talking, and they were like maybe talking about a book they'd written, and she was like, "Well, I've got this character, the guy, his mother was an alcoholic, so of course the woman that he falls for has to be a recovering alcoholic." And I was just like,
Yeah.
"Wow, that's just." But like he's got this fear of this of being. I mean, I don't even know what his fear would be, but like not getting himself into that situation again, and he falls in love with
Maybe
somebody. It turns
control.
out,
Yeah.
yeah, like that kind of stuff is really hammering that home, that kind of the
Mm.
one thing that he doesn't want to have happen that's going to really trigger him in every level is the one thing he gets almost. Yeah.
Mm.
Um
Crazy, eh?
yeah. Anyway,
Once you start thinking about it, it's like, oh,
yeah. The
go
ways that
down
you
that
can use
rabbit
it.
hole of thinking about the fears of your characters. And I
Uh,
always find when one of my books isn't working, which is just consequently is happening at the moment, it's usually because I haven't nailed the fears and I'm just
Mm.
writing the book without
Mm.
diving too deep.
Mm.
yeah, and it's
And that's,
happening,
I
but
think,
you
really
don't.
common because we always, I think most of us go into a story with some piece of it being intact, like
Yeah.
it's formed, whether it's who the character is or what happened to them or what their
Yeah.
problem is or what they want to achieve. We have these chunks of it and we feel
Mm.
like because we've got that figured out,
We're
we're
nailed
good.
it.
Let's go. Let's get to writing. But there's really a lot of I encourage people to do, quite a bit of planning. I know that everybody has different processes and we have people who aren't comfortable with that, and that's totally fine because if you don't do it in the beginning, you end up doing it in revision. So it
Mhm.
will,
Anyway,
even out
I
very
wish.
often, most of the
Mm.
time.
yeah.
Mhm.
But as somebody who is a planner, I like to figure all of that out on the front end so that I don't get any nasty surprises along the way.
I
Mm.
wish I could do that. I just have never been
Yeah,
able to. Same as
I've
Chef.
tried
We've
and I just get
tried
different
so many times,
surprises.
and I'm just like I'm 40,000 words into this book, and I'm just like, oh, it's so blah. like blah, 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 just
Mm,
writing for the sake of writing.
mm,
I know it'll work out, but at the moment,
yes.
And Wendy
it
It's
always
so
isn't.
ends up
messy in the
chucking,
middle.
she
Yeah.
ends up
Yeah.
chucking like a good 20, 30,000 words out every book. And it's just breaks my
Horrible
heart.
way to write. Horrible way to write.
No, it's not though. Everybody's got their process and there's no one right way to do it.
No.
Mm,
No.
yeah. So you
Good
talked
job.
about
Right. Yeah.
villains versus protagonists and fears and them maybe being different for each of those archetypes. Could you talk about that? Like how do we deal with fears in a villain versus
Yeah. So I think that protagonists, they both come into the story with their own issues. And I think that protagonists very often at the beginning of the story, they aren't aware of what they're afraid of and they figure it out along the way. And then they learn to deal with it.
Mm,
Villains, I think either they are in denial about their fear and they never learn how to deal with it because they don't want to know or they don't want to face it, or they know what their fear is and they don't care. They see it
yeah.
as a strength, they see it as something that's protecting them. And so they never aim to do anything about it throughout the story. It drives protagonists and villains in the same way, but their arc is very different in relation to their fear. A fear arc for a villain is going to be pretty flat because he may have some revelations along the way, but he's not going to actually do anything about them. Um, I think that uh, protagonists see fear as something that once they really become aware of it, they see that it's a problem. They see that they want to fix it and do something about it. Whereas villains very often will embrace their fear and then also uh, they'll weaponize other people's fears. So they'll figure out what you're afraid of, what the protagonist is afraid of, and then they'll use it against them and they'll manipulate them and they'll create situations that make them weak because of their fear. So you know, they don't have the regular empathy that most people have, where they're not going to do that to other people because they know how that feels. It's like there's none of that with them. They go to that really dark place with fear, and they double down, and then they end up doing a lot of things to feed that fear and feed that protection that they're trying so hard to achieve that protagonists would never do. They cross the moral lines and they get really flexible with their moral codes, all because the fear is so important for them to uphold and to double down on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the truth actually becomes very murky, doesn't it? For both the protagonist and the villain, because it's how they see themselves. So it's their truth, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And it goes back to that self-actualization need,
Mm,
that's so important, is that when we're in denial, when we're denying something about ourselves or rewriting something about ourselves so we can be comfortable with it, um, we can say that that makes us happy and satisfied, but at some level we're not, because
mhm,
in our psyche we know that we're living a lie. And
Mm,
mm,
so it is again a driving force. So even a villain who, is going digging in really deep into that fear and like using it against people and justifying it and doing things that they shouldn't be doing, and seem to be okay with it, but I think at some level, it's driving them internally because
mm,
that self-actualization is shot and it's not there.
mm,
mm,
And they may not want to think that they need that, but we all do.
mm.
So it just keeps creating problems.
Yeah.
Mm,
So if you had like a redemption arc, so you write one book and then the next book is the redemption arc of the villain, it would be that person figuring out those things that they had used against others and realizing in the same way as a hero would realize. Yeah.
mm,
Is
yeah.
Yeah, that
there
would be
a
cool.
yeah. As I normally don't like redemption arcs, but when we talk about it in that way, I'm kind of fascinated by the concept of it. Um, so what is there ever a do all genres use the the wound and the fear and all those kinds of things? And what I'm thinking of is, for example, thrillers or books where they have characters that's the same main character again and again, and it's like a secret agent or something like that, and they don't seem to have it's always really action filled, and they don't necessarily have an arc, and they don't necessarily learn anything, and then the next book or the next, and in movies, someone like James Bond,
Jack
you know,
Jack Reacher.
Jack
Mm.
Reacher,
Jack
yeah.
Reacher.
Yeah, who kind of, you think they've learned something, then they go back to the next book and they're or the next one and they're the same again. Yeah, how does that work? Like, is that just they don't use them, or is it, yeah, something different that I
Yeah,
should?
you're talking about a flat arc basically
Mm,
where the character doesn't change. It's like Indiana Jones in the first Raiders of the Lost Ark. He's the same at the end as he was at the beginning. And those stories really aren't about character arc.
No.
They're more about achieving a goal, learning new skills, all of those
Adventure.
things that should go
Yeah.
along with. They're more story focused than they are character focused. And
yeah.
so in those stories, there's not typically, a debilitating fear because it's not something that they're going to be overcoming. I mean, you had Indiana Jones and snakes. I mean, he was afraid of snakes, but that wasn't
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
something that was terribly debilitating for him. It wasn't like a deep fear. And so I think that fear, obviously, it does play into the stories, but it's more situational, I think, in those stories than it is story level or, character
Like
level.
external stuff rather than internal stuff. He's
Yeah.
dealing
Yeah.
with a bunch of actions, and there is a story goal that he's achieving, but it's not necessarily an internal one. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
So
Because we know that he, with Jack Reacher, he doesn't want to get serious with somebody because he doesn't want to stay in one place because of his past, because of his family situation or whatever. And I think you couldn't have it any other way and still have his books
Yeah.
Right.
because he's got to travel. So
Yeah.
that's just the nature of him.
Mm.
and yet
And it's wildly
sadly,
successful. I mean,
Yes.
Yeah.
the change arc is
Yes.
not the only way to go.
No.
I would argue that mostly they're the ones that appeal to the most people the
Yes.
most.
Yes.
Mm.
But it's definitely an option that works.
Yeah.
But you couldn't have a romance book that didn't have a change arc like that. Like, you couldn't do romance and
That wouldn't
have
be
it
romance then, would it? No.
where they didn't change. You wouldn't have a flat arc. No.
I think that would be more like the old romance that we used to have, back in the 60s and the 70s before
Yeah.
then when there really was not a lot of arc.
No.
And
They were arrogant
I don't think that works for romance. And
at
that's
the
why we
beginning.
have the
Yeah.
huge romance genre that we have now that's bigger than anything else.
Mhm.
Because of the kind of the evolution of the romance novel over
Mhm.
time.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So is there okay, one common piece of advice that you actually disagree with just in general with emotions rather than specifically fear?
Oh. Oh gosh, with emotions. I don't think so. I I feel like we've talked so much about emotions
Yeah.
in our career, me and Angela, and all the books that we've written,
Yeah.
that I can't really think of advice out there about emotions that I would disagree with. Um, I'm sorry, I can't.
No,
Just
I
have
think
them.
that's good.
You must have
Nothing
them.
yeah. It's important
You
to
must have emotion.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is there anything else about fear that we need to keep in mind? Like, how to, the best way to layer it in, or how to create a good fear for our characters?
I don't think so. It's just, again, doing the background work to figure out what the greatest fear is. But then I think it's really important too to understand who your character is emotionally so that you
Yeah.
know how they respond to fear and all of the other emotions. When we can, really figure out who they are emotionally. Are they introverted or are they extroverted? Are they reserved or demonstrative? Are there certain things about them that make them um, act differently or a certain way when they are afraid? Do you have somebody who was taught that fear was weak, that fear makes them weak? Or around certain people, they're afraid to show their fear because of the past that they have with them or things that they've been taught or, whatever. There's so much nuance
Mm.
in figuring out your character, understanding how they relate to fear, how they respond to it. That if you can figure that out in the beginning, then you can write them really consistently and they're going to be authentic to readers. And then when you do need to have a big something that happens, a big response, you know how far you have to push and what kind of circumstances you have to create to get them to that point of having that big response, or what kind of situations will get them
Mm.
triggered faster. It's just, again, it's the background work of just
Yeah.
getting to know your character and how they are when it comes to their emotions that can help you write them really consistently.
You really need to dial in that fear before they start, eh? You really
Mm,
need to know what makes them tick. Yeah.
yeah.
I think that works really well.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
you said consistency a couple of times there, and I think that's another important word. Like
Mm.
keep, and kind of that consistency through the whole story and kind of continuing to amp it up and
Yeah.
amp up the situations and not have them come across exactly the same situation but in different clothing or something, like it's dialing things
Yeah.
up in a
Yeah.
consistent way so that they do end up where you want them to end up.
Mm.
Um, and knowing how to make those triggers, which is, yeah. Is
Yeah.
there is there something in one of the thesauruses or even the fear thesaurus to say, okay, my fear is I'm rocky and I'm terrified. I need respect and I don't feel I've got it. What are the situations that I can put my character in to make me come up against that fear? Like, how do I know that the situation that I've created is going to be the right one or is going to push them sufficiently?
Yeah, we've got every the way the book's laid out is in the front, like 50 pages is just instruction about fear, about the greatest fear and how to write fear and all of the things that we've talked about basically here. And then the entry portion of the book is just like the Emotion Thesaurus. So there's a two-page spread that has a common fear that is a really big deal for people, such as not fitting in, the fear of not fitting in. And so, if that's my character's fear, the book has all of these ideas that you can use as really as brainstorming to kickstart the process of what it looks like, what internal struggles a character with that fear might have, how it's going to hinder and disrupt their life, emotional wounds that it could stem from, and then scenarios that could trigger that fear. So you're talking about, what situations can I create that is going to help get them where I want them to go? We've got, ideas for that information in there, human needs that could be impacted if that's your character's greatest fear, and then ways that they can minimize it or overcome it in the end. So we try to just, come up with information that people can use, knowing that it's not a perfect fit for any story. You have to look at your character, you have to look at the story that you've created and
Yeah.
kind of the message that you're wanting to tell. And then, but these are ideas that you can take and tailor and personalize to your character and what they're going through. So it's a really good brainstorming opportunity just to get kind of the juices flowing and to help you to understand the whole process
Mm.
of the character and where they were and where they are and then where they need to get to and what you can do to get them there.
Yeah, because
Sounds like a must purchase for every
Yes, it
author to
does.
me.
I really hope so.
Mm.
I'll buy it. It's okay. Oh, you've got one
Trudy
good.
will always get it soul sharp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that the idea of personalization, and that's what we're all doing with all of our books. Because I mean, I guess you could,
Yes.
there's all the books out there. There's
Yeah.
I've got ones that are like the 7 basic storylines, or
Yeah.
there are only a certain number of stories that we can tell, but it's the way we personally tell them and how
Yeah.
we develop these things, like the fear and the wound and all those kinds of
Mm.
things. So
Mm.
it's awesome that you've provided
Awesome.
this amazing practical
Sounds like,
tool to help us do all of this.
yeah. Thank
So,
you so much.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
That's
Yeah.
okay. So I've just got one little golden piece of advice for you to leave our readers with, something that I don't know, wish you'd been told earlier, or something that you think is really important for people to remember in their writing careers.
I think it's important to be patient and don't rush.
Yeah.
We're always, so many of us, we're interested in the end result, and checking the box, finishing the book, publishing the book, the end, whatever it is for us, that we're so eager to get to that point that very often we push too fast to get there.
Yeah.
And writing it's a long journey. It's, what's that saying? It takes 10,000 hours doing anything to become an expert at it. And
Yeah.
there's really no rushing that. So,
Mm.
um, slowing down, enjoying the journey, recognizing it as a journey, and seeing growth and appreciating the growth that you're making in little steps along the way is really, really important. Because that's really what it's all about.
Mm.
Brilliant.
So
Excellent piece of
Awesome.
advice.
Love that
Yeah.
advice.
Mm.
So if someone wants to find out more about you or all of your resources, where would they go?
yes, our blog is writershelpingwriters.net. And we
Mhm.
have a bookstore page there that's got information on each of the books and kind of an overview and where they're being sold, as well as we have a tools for writers page that's got free resources. A lot of them are some of the appendix graphics or worksheets that are in the back of our books that we put up for free after the book goes out. So there's a lot of information. We've been blogging since 2008.
Wow.
So really search
A
for a
couple of
lot of
years.
things and find information there.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
that's,
hopefully
Wow.
people can find what they need there.
that's awesome.
Brilliant.
Fantastic.
That's
I'm going to go
awesome.
there right after this.
Mhm.
And where can we be found?
Whoever.
Yeah.
At spargillspodcast.com. You can find us on Patreon, Spargills Podcast. We have a wonderful group that we go in and interact with and answer questions and things like that. So anywhere that says Spargills Podcast, we're away. We're your people.
Awesome. Awesome, Wendy. Thank you. And thank you, Becca. I've really enjoyed this chat on
Yeah,
fear today.
it's
It's
been amazing.
fascinating.
Been good.
Keep
Yeah.
talking all day, but unfortunately, we must
Yeah.
end or people will get
We
angry with
must work.
us. Thank you. And thank you to all of our listeners for coming along for another episode of the Spa Girls podcast. We've loved having you here with us. We'll be back again next week with another episode of the show. But for now, farewell.
Keep
Bye.
well. Bye.
Bye-bye.